I'm Marty Hendricks with Fox 2548 very pleased to be with Wes Hotkowitz of Packers.com to discuss the upcoming 2022 Packer Draft. How you doing, Wes?
I'm doing good, Marty. How are you on this fine day?
Excellent. Now that the computer issues are behind us, um, let's talk Packer Draft. Last year, round one, it was a little crazy with the bombshell announcement of Aaron Rodgers being unhappy in Green Bay. A little bit different setting for this year's round one, correct?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's funny. All 4 years that Brian Gutekunst has been the GM, something strange has happened. You know, whether it's the trade back with New Orleans a number of years ago, or drafting twice and moving around like they did in 2019. And then obviously last year with the Rodgers news and everything that played into that, it kind of hovered over everything over the offseason. And now things in a much better place. I think Rodgers has spoken several times now about how he feels the lines of communication have improved from Mark Murphy to Brian Gutekunst, Matt LaFleur, everybody involved. They feel like this thing is in a really good spot right now. And with that, he agreed to this extension. And for the foreseeable future, as long as Aaron Rodgers wants to play in the National Football League, it looks like that'll be happening in Green Bay.
Oh, that's huge. I know in Green Bay to have that set, but there was a big departure. You know, Davante Adams, the trade, but the Packers benefited there with some draft picks. And can you just touch on how the Packers will probably look at the draft receiver-wise in the first couple rounds with Adams and his tremendous record-breaking production gone from last season?
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing, Marty. I mean, if there was ever a year in which you want to be able to bunch up some picks in the first and second round, this is probably it. I know there's a lot of experts out there that have kind of referred to this as sort of a super draft with the amount of prospects and college kids that went back to school last year because of the COVID situation. So here we are once again. I mean, this is going to be another deep draft, especially at the receiver spot. I think CBS Sports has had it somewhere around 12 to 14 guys, they think, in the top 100. Certainly, 8, 9 that could potentially be in play there in the first round. The Packers sitting at 22 and 28, they have everything that they can do. I mean, they can move up if they want to go to try to get somebody. They could potentially move back like they did in 2008 when they felt good about Jordy Nelson, but then still traded back into the second round because they thought the value would be there. Whether you want a Christian Watson who has the size and the speed, or a Chris Olave out of Ohio State that's a little bit smaller, but certainly could be a deep threat. There's so many different options. And as I've kind of said, there's a different type of receiver for every type of offense, depending on what a team is looking for.
What do you think the Packers are looking for? Do they value that? They also lost MVS to Kansas City, so they lost that, take the top off the defense speed. What do you think they're looking for this in round one?
Yeah, Olave would fit the bill in terms of the speed. I mean, it's comparable in the 4.3 range there, but at 187 pounds, he hasn't really been the type of receiver the Packers have drafted a lot. In that regard, Christian Watson out of North Dakota State, and obviously Treylon Burks too, from Arkansas, who had a phenomenal season last year and even in better pro day and in NFL scouting combine, who has the size and the speed. Those types of players are probably the ones that fit the bill a little bit more for Green Bay. Brian Gutekunst really likes being able to look and find those 6'3", 6'4" receivers that have some speed to them. As so much has been focused, as you said, on Davante Adams, you kind of forget about the element that they lose without MVS. And Matt LaFleur at the NFL owners meetings last month in Florida said, I mean, they need to replace a speed element. And this is going to be a big draft to do that. I mean, there's a lot of guys that fit that 4.3 to 4.4 range that really can help challenge and take the top off of defense.
Olave certainly, like you say, fits that bill. Maybe not as, take a lot of hits, durability, that's the D-backs get bigger and, just as nearly as fast. If you had to pick right now, who would you take? And I'll give you my guess.
I think Burks would make a lot of sense. I love the way he tested. It kind of affirmed everything that he did last year at Arkansas. And the fact of the matter is, I mean, I think when you look at the strides they made offensively last year and as an entire team, I think he played a lot into that. And, 6'3", that type of range with that sort of speed, it's going to draw people's attention. I think Watson's probably the one that a lot of Packer fans are probably a little bit, partial to. Obviously,
sentimental.
Yeah, the sentimental favorite. Obviously, there's the Pierce kid too, right, out of Cincinnati that has said he's a Packers fan. So there's him too. But I just think that Burks is he is the total package at that spot. And if he'd be there at 22, or if they have to move around a little bit, there's some good defensive prospects too, but it's been 20 years, Marty, since they've taken a receiver in the first round. And certainly Sammy Watkins maybe changes the direct need for that spot. But this is the type of draft. When you look at the depth and the picks the Packers have, it would make a lot of sense to go the wide out route.
And there's been so many mock drafts, potential offensive linemen, the receivers are kind of all over the board. But, the more I think about it, I agree with you with Burks, that wingspan, he might even go up to get him if he has to, just depending how, when you have the flexibility with 10, 11 picks, correct? And this year's draft, a lot of flexibility there. And if you, I think Burks is the guy, or Olave will be my, potentially could get him right down the road at 28.
Yeah, his stock has kind of been all over. I mean, you're seeing some people that have him in the teens and then some that have him fallen into the 20s. I think a lot of that has to do with the size, but I respect the fact that the kid, he stayed in school. He tried to improve his draft stock, obviously had a terrific run there at Ohio State. And he's a consistent performer, Marty. That's the thing, is he runs precise routes. He does all the little things in addition to having the speed. It's just that 187 that I think a lot of people are looking at and wondering, okay, over the course of a long year, a 17-game regular season, how does that hold up?
Yeah, excellent point. Wes, 4 picks in the top 60. I mean, can't quite call it embarrassment of riches, but that's a lot to work with. And Gutekunst has been very aggressive. Where will they go after wide receiver?
Well, that's the interesting thing about this, Marty. If they stay pat and they stick with their 4 picks in the top 60, that would be the first time since the NFL-AFL merger the Packers would pick 4 times within the top 60. The last time they've done it at all goes back to 1967, when obviously there was only, I think, 27 teams or whatever it was. So it would be almost unprecedented if they stay with this. But in addition to the receiver position, the defensive line has a lot of depth too. And certainly you look at all the kids out in Georgia. I mean, Georgia has the potential here, Marty, to have 8, 9 of their defensive players taken in this. And certainly that starts up front. Jordan Davis. We heard, Jerry Montgomery talk about a guy with some twitch, a guy that could potentially rush the pass a little bit more. I don't know if Jordan Davis necessarily fits that mold as much. He's probably more in that run stopper spot, but certainly a guy that is, I know a lot of people have mocked to the Packers just because of his size, how he could fit into this defense. But Devontae Wyatt is probably the one that I'm looking more at. I think at 6'3", a little over 300, I see those intangibles there that probably made obviously him successful at this level, but also the crossover there, the fact that that's the type of defensive lineman Green Bay's had a lot of success with, and certainly Kenny Clark being the biggest embodiment of that. There's a lot, though, depending on what position they want to go for, depending on how they want to help this team, and really how many resources they want to throw at the ball defensively with everything they need offensively. But the defensive line is one spot where you could see them trying to add some depth. Also, if they want to go edge rusher, you look at Purdue's George Karlaftis, a guy that I really like as well out there, a dude with a super high ceiling, from Greece, picked up the game late, has a really unique backstory. The Big Ten kind of figured him out a little bit towards the end of that season, but he is a really solid football player that I think too could really help deepen out that outside edge rushing position. You've seen the comparisons to Ryan Kerrigan there, a workhorse type player that could help with Preston Smith and Rashawn Gary if they want to keep that pass rush outside.
Yeah, you mentioned the stalwarts there, of course, Kenny Clark, doing the dirty work in the middle to have someone to complement him would be a tremendous asset to the defense. What do you think about tight ends on this year's draft?
Yeah, I haven't really taken too much of an account on the tight ends. Certainly there are some really strong players there, but the way I look at it right now, Marty, they're going to get back Robert Tonyan here at some point. I think a lot of the eggs are in that basket. Brian Gutekunst mentioned that he's on pace right now with his recovery. You have Mercedes Lewis. I don't know how you find another Mercedes Lewis and the way that tight end position is played and him being sort of the last of a dying breed. Certainly you can find them, but it takes time to develop. And then we are just a couple years removed here from Josiah DeGuara being added as well. So, Tyler Davis is back. Dominique Daphne's back. Maybe there's a guy later in the draft the Packers could take a look at there. But overall, I think when you look at the pressing needs at receiver and then even potentially the offensive line, trying to find some bodies there as well, that's probably where more of my attention be geared towards in this draft, just based upon trying to make this run with Aaron Rodgers and being sure to keep, the skill position players in place around him.
Well, and you had a great point, the offensive line, losing Lucas Patrick and Billy Turner, big losses, pretty solid and versatile. But I guess I still remember Ron Wolf always told me, can never have enough good offensive linemen.
Yeah.
And that Iowa is always a good place to mine for, a good old tackle or guard. Thoughts on offensive line prospects for the Packers?
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be an interesting spot too, because now you have Yosh Nijman coming back, right? Like that's going to be a spot where I look at, you see the way that the Packers have built their offensive line and the fact that they've committed to some of these guys long-term. Nijman is the guy at right tackle now that I'm really having my eye on. I'm very curious to see how he handles that spot, because it really does look like, especially with Elton Jenkins being in that position right now, where he's going to be trying to work his way back from this injury, Nijman has a golden opportunity there. Yeah, they probably will look at an offensive lineman, maybe in the first 2 rounds too, depending on if they feel like they got to add to that. But when you talked before, Marty, about how you can never have enough good ones, you saw that last year. You saw the value in that when you never really get back a David Bakhtiari, when you lose a Jenkins, when you lose Josh Myers for 11 games, they had to go deep into that depth chart, and they found some really interesting players. John Runyon, ends up starting 16 games, doesn't get called for a penalty all season at left guard. These late round picks, the Packers are as good as anybody at trying to find those type of prospects and turning them into real starting caliber players. I couldn't give you a prospect in this draft that could be coming out of that 5th or 6th round, but Green Bay has been really apt at finding those individuals and being able to build that base. So realistically, 11 picks right now, depending on how many times they move around any of those 3 days, I really do think the Packers could potentially take a look at a lineman there and see if they could actually, find somebody to develop and also have as someone that can maybe push Nijman for that starting job at right tackle.
Excellent insights, Wes. And, just looking back at who the Packers have drafted, Gutekunst, Eric Stokes last year, Jordan Love, Rashawn Gary, Darnell Savage, Jair Alexander. I mean, he has a pretty darn good track record.
Yeah. I mean, the early rounds here, Gutekunst has hit on quite a bit, because Elton Jenkins, I think pound for pound, you can make a case he's been his best pick so far. I mean, being able to find an offensive lineman that can start at all 5 positions in the 2nd round. And by the way, did it basically from day one. I mean, he was pushing Lane Taylor for that starting job from his first training camp in Green Bay. And I thought it was really interesting what Adam Stenavich said about him too, in that, his position this year likely is going to be determined by when he's healthy, where they need maybe some help and where he could potentially fit. He's played anywhere from center to tackle. That guy's the embodiment of what the Packers are looking for. And then certainly, Jair Alexander, the first pick that Brian Gutekunst made as GM, I don't think he could have made it any better. I mean, for them to move back 4 spots, get an extra 1st round pick in the process, and find a guy like Alexander who has that all-pro potential. Certainly they missed him last year. Being able to get Rasul Douglas back and taking Eric Stokes, though, I mean, you talk about having 3 cornerstones at cornerback that the Packers can move around a lot and have some, creativity with. If Alexander returns to form, if he puts that shoulder injury behind him, I think you're looking at one of the preeminent top young corners in this league. And it appears like the Packers have really built a solid cornerback base around him as well. So that's the exciting thing about what the Packers are looking at defensively. Offensively, a lot to replace, and you're not going to be able to do it overnight with Davante Adams. But defensively, it really is about adding a defensive lineman or an edge rusher or a cornerback or a safety. They don't have pressing needs. They can just kind of deepen out what is already a top 10 unit. And I think that's the exciting thing, to see what Brian Gutekunst and these scouts, what they are looking for and potentially who jumps off the board to them to bring into this program.
And Wes, the Achilles heel has been the special teams, to kind of round out your roster with, like you say, when you don't have those glaring needs. Hopefully some of these young guys can cut their teeth and, contribute and improve the special teams units.
Yeah. And I mean, we got to talk to, this past week, Bisaccia. I mean, You talk about a guy in terms of how Rich Bisaccia goes about this thing. Matt LaFleur in Florida used the term fiery to describe him, and it is a quiet intensity that kind of jumps through the podium at you, and really the discipline of it. I mean, it was really interesting listening to him talk about his philosophy with special teams. Basically it coming down to building your core, punt coverage unit, finding 6 strong players there that can kind of branch off and play on the other 4, core 4 units. That's critical. And I think one thing Green Bay has been struggling with in the last few years, regardless of who the coordinator is figuring out who those individuals are going to be and being able to get those type of contributions, regardless of what those players do on the offensive or defensive side of the ball. Pat O'Donnell coming in from the Chicago Bears, that's a big one for Green Bay. I think he's a type of player with his consistency, not only as a punter, but as a holder, knowing these conditions and what it's like to punt in this weather. I thought it was really interesting that Bisaccia said, yeah, we tried to sign that guy 4 years ago when he got to, then Oakland. And certainly he's become, a really stable force for Chicago in some really difficult circumstances. Mason Crosby is going to be in kind of a kicking competition, it would appear. And I would think after the draft, they probably bring in a long snapper as well to compete with Stephen Wardle. So that is going to be an interesting thing, seeing how the specials work out. But beyond that, it's about making sure just not looking for the spectacular right now, just looking for the stability. That's the message. And I think that's what Bisaccia is going to look to accomplish and really build off of here in year 1 with the Packers.
Well, he's a special coach. Obviously, the Packers paid a premium price for him, but it starts at the top, and to have a person with that, a coach with his experience and like you say, his personality and enthusiasm is special. And I think he's going to make a big difference for the Packers this year. Plus, which I also feel his experience will be something that on occasion Matt LaFleur can draw from. Yeah. With game planning for opponents and, Packers, winning this team in the NFL in the last 3 seasons under LaFleur, but stumbled in the playoffs each year, very disappointing losses. With the right acquisitions and a little bit of luck, injury wise, they just might be at the Super Bowl next February. And that's always a goal, correct?
Yeah, that's what they're shooting for. And I think when you look at how close they were the last couple seasons, I think that's something that definitely sticks in the craw a little bit. And they want to try to find what those few pieces are going to be that are going to be the difference. And certainly defensively, I think they found that formula last year. I think that defense, the way they were playing at the end of the season, the players they were getting back, they could have competed for a championship. It just was trying to work past special teams. Obviously, the offense having a tough go of it against the San Francisco 49ers. But, certainly the emphasis was there. I said it in our Insider Inbox column. It's obvious what the Packers are trying to do on special teams, even with the addition of a guy like Keyshawn Nixon, who was a cornerback that was with Bisaccia with the Raiders the past 3 years. A rotational defensive guy, didn't play a lot on that side of the ball, but was core and was one of his leading tacklers over the last 3 years. So that's going to be the thing. I think there's an idea and a thought that, a few Jared Bushes, it doesn't have to just be a first round pick that comes in and knocks down the door. It's finding other complementary players that can be those glue guys that can kind of push your units to the next level. That's what Green Bay has been basically spending all of its energy towards this offseason, and with the hope being that they can figure out what exactly those few pieces are and identify them and be able to take that next step.
Yeah, Wes, I think you hit it right on the head there, right on the head, complementary players. But then the big question is, whatever receivers come into the fold, it's obviously the Packers have a lot to replace in Adams' production, and just that developing that chemistry with number 12 is going to be, and that be so important, and that just takes time.
Yeah, it does. And you've seen it, time and time again. It's not impossible. Devontae Adams, Marquez Valdez-Scantling in recent years, they both were able to make impacts as year 1 players, as starting caliber players by the end of the season. But it really is going to be, I keep joking around with this, but it's kind of like the Moneyball thing, recreating Adams and MVS in the aggregate. I mean, just trying to find that production, those snaps, those catches, those touchdowns, and being able to have other guys pick up that pace. I mean, it could mean more on the running backs this year. Right now, as things stand, Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon are probably your 1A and 1B as far as offensive playmakers. Randall Cobb is back to kind of help break in that younger room. I think Alan Lazard, this is a golden opportunity for him this year to show what he's capable of and be able to take that next step towards being not just a starting player, but being a number 2, number 1 receiver. And then obviously Sammy Watkins gives them another option there as well. So it's going to be about creating players and getting comfortability there, I think, in the first half of the season, and whatever incoming receivers they do add, because they will add receivers during this draft. It's just a question of how soon. Being able to break those guys and get them up to speed and make them understanding what the standard is going to be in Green Bay and what they're going to need to rise to right away in year 1.
Wes, so appreciate your insights on the Packers 2022 draft. And we'll all be stay tuned that Thursday night will be a biggie. The first 2 nights, like I say, with 4 picks and the, under the top 60, that's going to be exciting to see what Mr. Gutekunst does with those opportunities.
Absolutely. It's a fun time to be following football, Marty. I'm excited for it.
You betcha, buddy. Take care.
All right. Thanks, man.